Hi everybody, today I'm going to demonstrate pinch pots. So pinch pots is probably one of the most basic types of techniques, ceramic techniques. Oftentimes it's the first one you'll learn about if you take an introductory or Ceramics 1 class, whether it's at a college or a community arts center. The best way is to start off with a ball of clay. I would say no bigger than a tennis ball, and the clay should be plastic. So we talked about the different stages of plastic, or the different stages of clay. Plastic, that means it's pliable, almost like dough. And then leather hard, where it's still dark, but it's stiff. The walls are a little stiff. It's almost the consistency of hard chocolate or cheese. And the next stage would be bone dry when it's, or greenware when it's finished and ready to be fired the first time. But we're going to, for now, what we're going to do today is just concern ourselves with those first two stages, because you can do different things at those different stages. So what I want to do, if I want to try to make somewhat symmetrical, I want to get the ball as round as possible, and then I'm going to take my thumb and gently press in there. Just a little bit. Don't try to do, the trick to doing this is not to do too much, try to do it all at once. And all I'm doing is kind of squeezing, pressing down, and I'm rotating it, and I'm moving it about a ½ inch. So what I'll do is I'll do this slow, and then I'll do it kind of quicker. But all I'm doing is kind of squeezing and turning, squeezing and turning, and squeezing or rotating it. And I want to keep the interior, the opening, I want to keep that small. I don't want that to get too wide, because if it gets too wide, I'm going to lose control. It'll become ungainly. So I'm just going to slowly go in there, and I'm going to press it and gradually make it deeper, and the walls will get thinner as it gets deeper. So what I'm doing is I'm redistributing the clay, making a negative space inside the ball. The volume's actually getting larger because it's going into space now. And now it has an inside space and an outside space, a characteristic of all pots. Most pots have an inside and an outside. So once I get to the stage, I can do other things. I can put it down on the table and turn it, rotate it one way. And all I'm doing, if you just, what you could do is just, rather than squeezing, just practice turning it in your hands. Just let it turn. Don't even squeeze. Right? And just the weight of you, or the pressure of you turning it, actually will squeeze the clay a little bit. So already you can see it's fairly symmetrical, and I hardly put any pressure on that at all. So what my goal is I want to continue doing that. Now if I simply squeeze, it'll go out into a bowl. But what I want it to do is to kind of go up a little bit, almost like a cup. So it'll be a little deeper. So to do that, what I'm doing is I'm squeezing just up this way. I'm kind of taking my hands. But I'm going to use the table as, the table is almost like a third hand. It's going like this. All right, think of it that way. So you can see as it gets larger, but if it's going to have a bottom, you see it's going to be easier if I use the table. So if I want to make it rounded, what I'm going to do is take my thumb and begin stretching it, and gradually stretching it out. I'm going to make this more spherical. See, so I'm actually pushing the wall out. So again, I'm barely touching it. So if I just squeeze the pot, the walls are going to go out. So what I'm doing now is I'm just squeezing slightly and turning, but I'm actually pushing the wall in this way. So this is a technique that I also show. That this technique of squeezing and pushing the wall inward, this can be used for making coil pots as well. And I'm going to be using this technique I'm going to show. Right now I'm making a pot, but if I enclose this, I would have more of a closed form, which could be made into like a more sculptural form, which I'm going to get to in a minute. A few minutes here. So this is just a ball that's hollow, and all I did was, I'm going to make something for the sculpture demonstration in a little while, but what I did was I just kept going in and then squeezing it until the hole became smaller and smaller. So if I want that here, I'm going to reach in there, and all I'm doing is kind of squeezing and turning it, squeeze, turn. And as I'm turning it, it's maybe a ½ inch, if that. So at first when you start squeezing and turning, it'll get kind of bumpy, but eventually the bumps will get kind of smaller. The bumps will not be as conspicuous. So I'm kind of, in the inside, it's hard to see this, but on the inside, I'm rotating my thumb this way, and I'm kind of stretching that out. And my hands are amazing. I think hands, like in terms of versatility of things that like appendages like that that are capable of doing different things among primates, I mean, hands have got to be tops. You think of all the different instruments a hand can play, to doing electrical or plumbing work, to using a computer, to even things that we do in this building, like drawing and painting. And obviously, your hand is an important tool, but it's used in combination with your brain and your heart. And by heart, I mean like the spirit. Okay, so it's fairly round, right? So I can't, as you can see, it's still kind of wet. I can't do too much more to this. I mean, I could squeeze it a little bit tighter if I wanted to, make that. But I still want to get in there a little bit, so. But that's about as round as I can get that. If I wanted to do more, what I can do is start to squeeze this way. So I'm squeezing this, I'm creating a neck. And as I do this, it's going to wrinkle a little bit, almost looks like a sack. So the second thing that's happened besides this going in is, as I'm pushing this in, the walls are actually getting thicker, right? So what can we do with a thick wall? We can make them thinner. So I can take that and begin pinching that up. So I'm just using my thumb. So as I'm doing this, you can see the opening's getting bigger. So if I want to make this neck become longer, I squeeze it in again, make the wall thicker, and then I can go in there and repeat the process and make the neck even longer. So I have sort of an organic shape. It's almost like an onion. So I think what I'm going to do is let this dry outside. It's a very warm day out, so this should dry pretty quickly. So here's one that's, this is one that's leather hard that I made earlier, an hour or so ago, and I let it dry. So it's, what I did was, it was a little bit lumpy, but what I'm going to do is refine this a little bit, and it's easier to manipulate because it's leather hard. So what I'm going to do is show you what my thumbs look like on the inside, because it was hard to see. So I remember I talked about going like this. So what I'm going to do is take my hand, hold it like okay. So if you were doing this at home, you could just work on this, until you're satisfied. Try to avoid cracks. So inevitably, like when people smooth out ceramics after it gets leather hard, or they want to smooth it out, they use water. So here's the thing with water. Water can be your friend because that's what gives clay its plasticity, besides the type of clay that you're using. But water can also weaken it. So if I add too much water to this, this will collapse like a wet noodle. So what I want to do is let it get leather hard, and then I can kind of take my hands when it's leather hard, and what I'm going to do is just kind of turn this back and forth and see if I can just smooth it. So I'm using water, but the water is, I'm almost using it like a lubricant. So it's almost like grease, and I just don't want to overdo it. So I could make this really slick just with water. If you're in the studio, or if you have access to like scraps of things like leather, this is just a piece of thin leather. I can make this really slick. So the leather works really well for doing this. If I wanted to make this really clean and tight, so in the lab I have these things called Sureforms, and Sureforms are really good for getting flat planes. So what I'm going to do is and the teeth are coming toward me. So that's fairly clean. And then if I wanted to clean the sides a little bit, like this, what it does, it takes the high areas down to the low areas, so it's a uniform wall and a uniform plane. So the Sureforms come in different shapes and sizes. These are some examples of some. I like using them also for ceramic sculpture, but they're meant for doing drywalling and for woodworking. So you can use, usually the flatter ones are used on convex areas, like rounded parts on the outside, right? And the ones which are more curved, like this, can be used on the inside. There's several of my advanced students that work on the wheel, and they actually use these when they're trimming their pots when they're leather hard. Sometimes they do, it depends. So what I'm going to do is to clean this up, I'm just going to go back and forth. So this piece of wet leather has the same properties as, it's like a synthesis between a rubber rib, right, and a wooden rib, and a sponge. I would say it's probably between these two, maybe a little bit like the wood tool, but probably between these, because it can smooth like this, but it's flexible like a sponge. So I can just go back and forth, and I can work on this so it's like coiled or even thrown. What else can you do if you want to use other tools? If you just take a simple ball, a round shape, I can push that in there and use that like a mold. I can make this into a little wad and smooth that out. If you want to use some of the tools in your kit, you can take your metal rib and clean it up this way. So when I gave the coil building demonstration, or when you see the coil building demonstration, I use most of the tools in the kit, but metal rib is a great tool because it's flexible, has an edge, but it's very good for shaping and smoothing. And all I'm doing is alternating it. I have a little bit of slip here. So you can take slip, fill in gaps too. There's not too many gaps in this. Shaping, what else can I do? I can take something round, if I want to emphasize that curve. So this is a larger curve. This is just a piece of wood dowel from an old stool, right? And I can roll that, and I can accentuate that curve there, and actually even put an edge there. Let's say I want to make this maybe, rather than making it round, I want to put sides on it. I can take a flat paddle and I can facet it a little bit. I'm putting 6 facets on this. So it goes from the curve into the facets into the curve in the top. And I have that little ball holding it in place. But it all started out as a pinch pot. So the pinch pots could get is complex. It could be relatively simple, but then you can take other shapes and make them more complex. So this is just about done. All I'm going to do is just fix a lip, and it's done. Here's another one I did. So what I did here is I took a ball of clay, and you'll see it's got a high foot and a higher vessel shape. So what I did was I took my pot, I'll make a smaller version here, made my ball, made my indentation, and I'm not going too deep. What I'm doing is I'm going deeper on one side than the other. So I'm pinching, right? So you could do this pretty much with your fingers. If you wanted to, you could take a wood dowel or maybe like a broom handle, anything that's kind of rounded at the end and kind of long, and just work it around there. But I could also do it with my fingers too. And then I would turn it over, right? Once, like I've got the other one, this side's just roughed out, I turn it over. I'm not going through now. And I would start making the foot on the bottom. So ultimately it's going to go something like this. So what I'm doing is I'm making a double-ended pinch pot. There's a smaller vessel on one end where the foot is, and then there's a larger vessel which is faces vertically upright. And then I can repeat the same technique of turning it on the table this way and begin shaping it. And again, I'm just squeezing, turning. And if you just lightly turn it and ever so lightly squeeze it, it's amazing how quickly it becomes symmetrical. And then I can reach in there if I want to stretch it out more, my thumb. So that process of pushing it with my thumb, if I want to stretch this out, I can. Now eventually this will get really thin and we'll need to set up. So what you do is just try to stretch it out as much as you can, and then when it feels like, you know, it's starting to become a little ungainly, just pause and put it somewhere to dry. If you put it by a fan, it'll dry faster. If it's sunny out, you could put it out in the sun. If it's wintertime, usually things are drier in the wintertime, but however long it takes, if you don't have a fan or if it's not a really warm day outside, it might take a bit longer. But your goal is to get the clay so it's leather hard. Okay, so there's one that's just roughed out. So I can do the same thing with this one. So if I want to clean it up this way, I could use the Surform the same way. When I'm using that Surform, the teeth are coming toward me. I could even use it on the bottom too, if I want to get the walls kind of even. Yeah, it's much easier to refine this once it gets leather hard. Okay, so then I take my wet leather and I can smooth it out. And if I clean this up, I'd have a nice little, that's like a nice little parfait glass. Okay. Now remember, if you make something in ceramics, it's a general rule, things can shrink 15% or more from the plastic stage to the glaze stage. So always keep that in mind, if you're making something and you expect it to be a certain size in the end, you're making it a little bit bigger. Remember that? I'd say 15% or more is a good rule. So you can see that's cleaning up. So I'm going to turn this over, do the same thing to the bottom. So once this is done, leather hard, I could, if this was on the earthenware clay, I could put, or any kind of clay you can put decorative slips on, but if it was earthenware, I could put decorative slips and finish it with a clear glaze with just the decoration and the slip. So there's another one. Okay, let's see how those other ones are drying. This is that onion-shaped one. I'm gonna, if I want to stretch that some more, using a tool, I could take maybe a wood down. I can squeeze it around that and make that neck even a little longer. So up to now, all these things are smooth. If I wanted to emphasize the idea that it was an onion, I could even push that idea further by incising some lines on that. So I could take my wooden rib. So a service I do for most of my students is I sharpen these. Normally when you get them, they're not quite this round, but by sharpening they work, in my experience, they work better. And then what I'm going to do is, if I want to get this even, I'm going to split this up into quarters and then eighths. So you'll notice what I'm doing here is I'm rolling the edge. And that gives a cleaner line if you're making a line which is horizontal or vertical. And what I'm going to do is just follow that line all the way up. And then I'm going to take this end. Let's see. Now I guess I'll drag it. What I'm going to do is have that line, since it's getting smaller, I'm going to have it fade. So the lines are a little wider where the form expands, and then they get narrower as they go toward the lip, and then I'll diffuse them. Just so there's a bit of a transition, and the lines don't end abruptly. So if I wanted to give this more movement, I can watch this. So this is straight. Watch what happens. All I'm going to do is twist this. Not too much where I twist it off, just a little bit of a twist. And it's just a nice, interesting shape. Okay, so there we go. That's pinch pots for you.